In this week's Parsha, there appears the second paragraph of what we call Kriya Shema, and the long paragraph of Vayoim Shamoah Tishmiu El Mitzvosai Asher Anochi Mitzav Eschem Hayom. So, Shamoah means to hearken, to hear, to listen. But in Hebrew, and later on in Yiddish nuance as well, there's something that's called heron, means to hear, but there's something that's called der heron, which means to really hear, to understand the nuance. For instance, there are many times you get a transcript of a conversation or of testimony or of a speech, and the transcript is 100% accurate. But the transcript does not tell you the tone of the speech. It doesn't tell you the inflection. It doesn't give you the nuances. And therefore it's always an imperfect source. That's the problem that always exists. We have a rule in halacha, mipihem v'lo mipi ktavam. The witnesses have to say it in front of the judges. The judges have to hear how they said it. The written transcript itself is insufficient because it never tells you the whole story. It just tells you part of the story. So if, for instance, someone would make a sarcastic remark, well, if you read it from the transcript, you can't tell that it's sarcastic. And therefore you will take it literally. And that's why Chazal always emphasized that the great bulk of the Torah is Torah Shebal Peh. It's the oral law. You hear how your Rebbe said it. So even though it's written down, and the transcript is accurate, but you don't get the whole story. So the Meforshim say that's why the verb is repeated here. Vayoim Shamoah Tishmiu. Shamoah means to hear, so that would be sufficient. Listen to the mitzvahs. No, Tishmiu, it's not enough. You have to go deeper. You have to understand the nuance of the mitzvah. Because otherwise, certainly over time, the true meaning of what the mitzvah is, or what its purpose is, can easily be lost because you didn't hear it. You only read it. Now, the problem here is that Moshe Rabbeinu was only alive for 120 years. So we don't hear in the Torah Moshe Rabbeinu's voice, so to speak. We hear what he wrote down. We hear the Torah Shebiksav. And part of the idea of Torah Shebal Peh was to transmit to us what Moshe really meant. And that's the origin of what we call, in Yiddish, they call it trop, which means the cantillations, the notes, the rhythm of the Torah. And there's discussion in halacha whether or not Kriyas HaTorah that does not have this rhythmic emphasis to it, whether you're Yotze or not, was that sufficient? And that's especially true of a Sefer Torah that we have, because that has no punctuation whatsoever. So how do you know where the verse ends and the next verse begins? So the system of the notes, so to speak. Now every community, because it's given over to people orally, so every community has, so to speak, its own sounds to the notes. So if you go to a Yemenite synagogue and hear Kriyat HaTorah, that's different than if you'll hear it, in the Mir Yeshiva. But what they have in common is that they have the notes. How the notes are sounded, so then that becomes a matter of tradition, of community, of society. There is no question that we're probably a long way away from what the notes originally sounded like. Because we're in exile 1,800 years, so I'll give you an example. In the United States, for instance, if you hear a Kriyas HaTorah and the Baal Koreh came from Baltimore, you know that he came from Baltimore, even though it's the same notes as though he came from Kansas City. Because dialect, where we grow up, how we first hear the words, how we first hear the notes, all of that colors how we are able to transmit it. So there are, for instance, I think the best example is how do you pronounce a vav with a cholam, a vav with a dot on top? So there it depends. The German Jews pronounced it like ow. The Polish Jews pronounced it oi. The Lithuanian Jews pronounced it oh. So what is the correct way? How did Moshe Rabbeinu pronounce it? And on that, the problem of correct pronunciation always rests. So the basic agreement in the Jewish world was that you pronounce it the way your father pronounced it, or your mother. Because that's the best we can do. But you can never say that you have the correct pronunciation, because the correct pronunciation may be different completely. Now that arose here in the land of Israel when the original settlers here especially the non-Orthodox developed a method of pronunciation which resembled, but it's not the same, as the Sephardic pronunciation. So the aw became ah, the S sound became a T sound. So the shaila was asked in halacha many times. Let's say you're an Ashkenazic Jew, and you came from Lithuania, and you settled in Eretz Israel, and you're attending a synagogue that uses Sephardic pronunciation. But that's not the way you pronounce it. So what should you do? Should you adopt the Sephardic? Or should you maintain your own custom? So there are tshuvas on this. There are rabbinic response. There's a famous response from Rav Kook, who said that you can adopt the Sephardic, though everyone that ever heard Rav Kook pray realized that he was still using the Ashkenazic pronunciation of Lithuania, where he came from.
Latvia.
What?
Rabbi Kook is from Latvia, Riga, Latvia, which is next.
Yeah. So this was a continual question, and in many circles in the Jewish world today, it still remains a question. So we don't have that basic original pronunciation. Some say that it's the Yemenites that are the closest. The Yemenites claim that they went into exile from the first temple, and therefore their traditions are older than any other society. And you hear the pronunciation differently. The Ashkenazim pronounce an ayin as though it were an aleph. Ah. But everybody agrees that the ayin somehow has an N sounding to it. It's like ang. And you hear that even in the Ashkenazim, because you say Yanko. You don't say Yaakov. So the nun still remains somehow. So we have, for instance, the first pasuk in Kriya Shema, Shema Yisrael. So it ends, the Shema has a big ayin at the end. So how do you pronounce the word Shema? So many say you should say Shmang. You should have the nun sound in it. Not only the nun sound is like combined with a gimel. So it's like Shmang. But most of the Ashkenazim pronounce it Shema, without a nun, without a gimel. So you're Yotzei. You're mispronouncing the word. That was what the tshuvas were about. Whether adopting a certain dialect while reading the Torah or praying, does it allow you to discharge your obligation? Or do you have to be careful to try and say the original? Since we don't know what the original was, so it's always a problem. And you have, you're all aware, you have completely different dialects. The Polish Jews and the German are completely different. And so the Rav Kook said, and all the poskim basically say, you should do what your father did. You should keep, but here in Eretz Yisrael, with the rise of the return of the Jewish people here, where the Hebrew language is used as the language of the country, so then you naturally have and people come from 80 different countries, so then it's hard to say what the correct pronunciation should be or is. So that's part of Oyom Shamoah Tishmiu. Because if you don't hear the rhythm and the notes, you don't get what is being said. So there are shittas in halacha that in order to be Yotzei Kriya Shema, you have to say it with the trop. You have to say it with the notes. Because without the notes, it may not be incorrect, but it's certainly not fulfilled. There's another deeper point here that I want to discuss regarding Tishmiu. That the Rambam says, one of his basic statements is that the purpose of a Jew is to know God. Das. Leidas Hashem. He doesn't say to worship God. He doesn't even say to love God, though he discusses that too, how that could be. To love something, you have to have an object that you can identify with. So a person can love one's spouse because there is a person, or love one's children because there's a person. But can you love an object? So there are people who say that you can, because you see people love money. But money is also an object. It may be an imaginary object, but it is. But to say V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, and the Lord is so beyond us to contemplate, to deal with. So how can you have Avas Hashem? So the Rambam says the path to somehow having the relationship to God is das, is to know. And therefore, for instance, he emphasizes the obligation to know nature and natural sciences. Because that's how one of the ways that we know. Another way is to know Torah. So knowledge itself can be one of the ways to know God. Like if lahavdil, someone writes a book and you read the book, so you get some sense of who and what the author is, because it's reflected in whatever was written. So this opened up a whole area in Jewish thought called Tamei HaMitzvos. To know God. So the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us mitzvahs. Are we supposed to understand in it with our own minds, one way or another, what's the benefit of this mitzvah? What is the mitzvah here to teach me? Or am I just supposed to give blind obedience? I was told that I'm supposed to do this, so I'll do it. Without understanding. Now, it's true in general life as well. It's true in an army, for instance. The individual soldier may not be aware of the grand strategy. Why is it important to capture this place? He doesn't know that. He just knows that he has to do what the command tells him to do. So how do we look at Torah? So there are those who say that we should try and not delve into reasons, because any reason that we will give will be insufficient. So, for instance, in this parsha it says, "L'man yirbu yemechem v'yemei v'nechem alo adomo asher nishba Hashem la'avosechem l'seis lohem k'mei hashamayim al haaretz." Do this because I will then give you life and prosperity. Is that a reason for doing something? That doesn't explain why you should wear tefillin or have mezuzahs. I'm telling you a result, but I'm not giving you an explanation of what the mitzvah does. And then there's an entire literature in the rabbinic thought on Tamei HaMitzvos. The reason why what does the mitzvah stand for? So you have the Sefer HaChinuch and others that concentrate on this idea that every mitzvah has a reason that you can deal with. So then there are those that follow that division of chukim and mishpatim. So chukim are those things that are beyond our ability to give a reason to, but mishpatim are things that we could give a reason to, and we could explain why. And then there's a general category of why mitzvahs at all. Just be a good person, so to speak. The Rambam, especially the Moreh Nevuchim, wrestles with this problem. So in the Moreh Nevuchim, he gives specific reasons for specific mitzvot. But he gives a general reason for the entire overarching list of commandments. And the idea is that this somehow develops within a person spiritual qualities that will enable that person to know God in the sense of das. And we have that, for instance, in the Pasuk Laman Das Kol Amei Oretz K'Hashem Hu Elokim Ein Od. It isn't that you have to believe it, you have to know it. There's a great difference between believing and knowing. I can believe that Victoria Falls is the grandest waterfall. But once you experience it, so then you know it differently. It's not a matter of belief. And that's why anything that is secondary, film, sound, recording, etc., is never the original. Because film can bring you to belief, but it'll never bring you to knowledge. And the task before us is knowledge, to know. And that's the challenge that exists for us. And this paragraph in Kriya Shema tells us the result, but it doesn't tell us the reason. The result is you'll have prosperity, you'll have length of life, you'll have tranquility. Those are all results. They're not reasons. Because after everything, the question remains, why? And again, that's part of the task of knowing Torah, is to be able somehow to grasp this issue of why and come to some sort of satisfactory conclusion. And there are many, many different streams within Jewish thought that deal with these issues. And they're very important issues to think about, especially if you want to teach a new generation, want to inspire others. So then the question of knowledge and of why is always paramount. And that's why it says in the Torah, Vayom Shamoa Tishmiu, twice. It's not enough simply to be aware of things, but to try and understand, because that gives us our relationship, so to speak, with heaven and with the eternal. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.